Good afternoon. Welcome to the first Governance Audit Committee meeting of 2024. We'll crack straight on with the agenda. First item, apologies for absence. I've been notified that Tony Eason will be joining us slightly later, hopefully by 2 o'clock. Otherwise, I think we're all present and correct. Second item, declarations of interest. I've not been notified of any declarations of interest in advance of this meeting, but can I confirm with members whether there are any declarations of interest to report at this stage? No? Good. Third item, the public open forum. As we know, members of the public are invited and indeed encouraged to make representations to this committee meeting or tend to raise points or ask questions. Wendy, have any members of the public asked to join or make representations, please?
No requests received, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. In which case, we'll move on to item 4, which is our action list. If we turn to the action list, item 1. Item 1 is in respect of a paper on finance team capacity. We were originally expecting a paper from John Davis, head of finance, at this meeting, but I understand the paper will be delayed. I can see John online. John, would you like to just confirm where we are with that paper, please?
Good afternoon, Chair. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so we're just waiting for some clarification on some HR advice, which we'll be receiving probably next week now. That's penciled in. So once that has been finalised, I'll be happy to share the final proposal, Chair, and hopefully we'll be getting this over the line now very shortly.
Okay, that's good. So we'll assume for next month's meeting. Thank you. We'll keep that action open for the time being. Item 2 is respect of people strategy and asset management plan. I note the asset management plan and strategy is actually on the agenda for this meeting, so we can certainly close that element of this action. But I'm not aware in terms of where we are with the people strategy element, and maybe Richard Jones could update us on that element, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to start on that distinction between the people strategy and the asset management strategy, just for context, the people strategy isn't part of the policy framework in the Constitution and doesn't actually require a full council decision, but nonetheless is an important strategy for the council. It's been decided that the timescale for that will be adjusted slightly, and the primary reason for this, and the Governance and Audit Committee members understand, is that we want to ensure that we're involving our workforce within the development of that strategy and get a full understanding of the issues, both challenges and opportunities we currently face before bringing that back forward. So it's anticipated that'll be ready probably between April and May time at the moment. I think you've got dates for the committee set up till April. So pending the next date, we'll put it on the forward work programme as soon as possible when those dates are set.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Helpful. Any comments on what Richard set out? Phil?
Remind me, to me, it doesn't seem that long since we had an updated people strategy. Is this just going to be a reworking of it, or how much of a difference is there likely to be?
I think it's probably been a little while, Phil, since we've last refreshed the people strategy. I think. Sorry.
Time flies.
Yes. I think it'll come down to the extent to which, obviously, there's been significant change in the last few years in terms of our workforce, in terms of the nature of work, and also some of both the policy challenges we face as well as the council. So I think that's why we want to take a bit of time to reflect on what the feedback and involve the workforce is, and that will really shape how fundamentally it's changed. Obviously, there's some core principles that will run through it that will be similar, but the context of work, both challenges and opportunities now and for the future has changed quite a bit over the last few years, and it's making sure that our strategy for the future is in line with that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Action 3 is not due at the current time, so we shall leave that. Item 4 is in two parts. We've had an email response in respect of point A, so I'm satisfied that it answered the questions as far as it was deemed appropriate. The second item is not due until April 2023, so yet again, I assume officers are still comfortable with that timeline, and unless anyone objects. So, Peter.
So I need to highlight it's April 24, it should read. Otherwise, we are quite overdue on that one. But absolutely, we're dealing with that matter through the governance working group, which is due to meet shortly, and I think April should be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, that's a good spot. I was looking at that date, it just didn't register with me, but thanks. Okay, the fifth action is in respect of whistleblowing. Matt Gatehouse has forwarded an email only a few minutes ago. Hope you won't have a chance to read it, potentially. I was satisfied with the content, but please, if there are any further questions or comments, let's follow it up after this committee meeting. So, but subject to any feedback, I will assume this action to be closed. Similarly, item 6, Geraint Edwards provided a helpful update after our committee meeting in December. I was content with that update. Unless members object, I'm going to suggest we close that. Great, thank you. We'll move on to item 5. Item 5 is the statement of accounts for 2 charitable trust funds. I do note as well that this item is linked to item 6, which is the ISA 260. I do suggest we take these items in turn, but we'll ask the relevant officers to talk to these items and then take questions at the end of item 6. Hopefully that's okay, members. So if I could turn in the first instance, please, to John Davis, Head of Finance, who introduced this item. John, please assume we read the paper, but maybe draw to our attention what you expect the committee to do with this item, and then highlight any points of note.
Thank you, Chair. So these are the accounts relating to the financial year 2022-23. Committee will have received the draft accounts back at their meeting in July. So this is very much focusing on the process that has been undertaken since that point, which is the external audit and examination of those accounts. So in my mind, very much a formality for committee, given that I think pleasingly the result of the audit process is that both have been given an unqualified opinion by Audit Wales. And I think it's fair to say very minor adjustments needing to be made to the draft accounts that the committee will have received back in July. So, on that basis, very little for me to say around these. I think that said, I think it's just important to recognise the work that does go on in bringing these together throughout the year. It's a big effort. It doesn't go unnoticed, and I know Dave Jarrett and the team, take the responsibility given to them quite seriously in terms of the administration around these charitable trust funds, and it's pleasing to see that the arrangements around them are continuing to be robust. Given the minor changes that we've seen in the audit process. So I think that's pretty much it from me, Chair. I'm not going to drag out what hopefully is quite a formality for the committee.
Thank you, John. Could I hand over to Rachel Freitag, Financial Audit Manager from Audit Wales, just to talk us through the ISA 260, please?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Chair. Similarly to John, I'll try and keep this fairly brief, as they're quite short sets of accounts and clean bills of health from our perspective. So just to provide a distinction, I suppose, for the Welsh Church Act, we do undertake a full audit. But for the Farm Endowment Trust, that is an independent examination. It's below the audit threshold, so we complete a sort of a higher level examination of that set of accounts. So just to give you, we do a slightly different piece of work on each one of those. But as John's alluded to, in both sets of accounts, there were minor changes, narrative issues, minor roundings, things like that, nothing significant at all. I'd like to thank the officers, Dave Jarrett and the team and others in the finance team for their work supporting us to complete the audit. We certainly couldn't do our job without their support and cooperation. But without, unless there are any questions, I'll leave it there, other than to say I think the letter of representation requires approval for the Church Act, and for the Farm Endowment Trust. I believe that's going to the Farm Trustees meeting on the 24th, and the Auditor General is due to certify both on the 26th of January, which is ahead of the Charity Commission deadline at the end of the month.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Rachel. Questions? Phil, please.
Only a point of presentation, Chair. On page 6 of the ISA 260, paragraph 19, it gives the impression that there may be some information in Appendix 3. Appendix 3 doesn't exist. I appreciate that there's nothing of significance, and I don't want to make a point on it, but it's just something that perhaps the Audit Wales can correct next year. But it's only presentational.
Yeah, I think the Audit Wales will note that point and take a suitable action. Thank you.
Thanks.
Martin, please. Thank you, Chair. I didn't get into the meeting in time when declaration of interests were being discussed, so just to formally record a personal interest with regard to the Monmouthshire Farm Endowment Fund. I'm a governor at Coleg Gwent, and I filled in the necessary form, and I think I've returned it to Wendy already. And just a final point on those accounts. The trust funds and narrative doesn't actually mention the Coleg Gwent, which is now the legal entity which has many campuses, including Esk Agricultural College, and I wonder why that's the case, because that has been the case for many years now. So perhaps again next time round we can make sure this is Esk Agricultural College brackets part of Coleg Gwent, and that would help because that is the legal entity. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I can see John Davis making a note, and John, if you take that as ways and action, please. Not for formal minuting of this committee, just an informal action. Apologies. Sarah, please.
Delighted to see the unqualified audit, which is exactly what we'd expect. But just a question in terms, really, I think not as much from the accounts, but as the effectiveness of the fund. What proportion of grants made in Monmouthshire were to individuals for the relief of poverty? My impression is that other authorities use the church fund more extensively for that than whereas Monmouthshire has tended to use it for grants to organisations. Is that still the case?
John, I don't know whether you're well placed to answer that question, or whether it's a question better directed at the trustees. John, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think to your latter point there, Chair, it's a question that I can take back and register, with those in charge of that, and come back with maybe a response at a later date, if that's okay with the committee.
Yep, great. If you could do that, please. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one matter of accuracy. Are we correct in naming James Williams as a secretary? Because he wasn't here in March 2023. Should it be Matt Phillips?
John, your thoughts, please.
So, in terms of the accounts themselves, they would reflect the balance sheet date and any updated information relevant since then. So I think, given the fact that, that position would have changed, I can see the argument for both, Councillor Eason, but I don't think there's a particular issue with that being updated to the most current status.
Yep, thank you. Good spot. I don't think it makes a material difference, as John just stated, so that's fine. I'm not seeing any other members who wish to contribute to this stage. So let's wrap up. Firstly, by saying thank you to John and the team for preparing the accounts, and thank you to Rachel and her team for auditing the accounts. And of course, a great result, an unqualified audit opinion on both. which is good. So I think we can accept both sets of accounts, and I'm content to co-sign the final letter of representation. So thank you one and all. We'll now move on to item 7. Item 7 is the asset management strategy, a large, very informative document. I think I'm correct in saying that we have Nick Keys here, Head of Landlord Services, to introduce the item. So welcome, Nick. Assume we've read the paper. The paper was, I said, long, quite complicated, but very informative. So assuming that the committee's read the paper, but please just draw to our attention the key points of note.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and then good afternoon, members. As the Chair's rightfully summarised, this is the strategy, the asset management strategy, strategic document for the way that the Council's land and property is to be managed moving forward, how it will be used, and ultimately how it will contribute to the Council's policy objectives as set out in the Community and Corporate Plan. The Chair's right to highlight that it is a lengthy document. That is somewhat by design, and you'll appreciate that the strategic document is structured to meet the needs of many different audiences and users. Certainly could be more succinct if it was purely, if you like, for property professionals, but clearly there's a large number of people this affects and impacts and is relevant to. That being the case, hopefully it's helpful if I just draw out, I suppose, the key structure of this strategy, some of the pertinent points, and obviously, I suppose, critically, the points we'd welcome feedback on today from this committee. So starting, I suppose, with the fundamental point of this document, which is really clear purpose and clarity on why this strategy is needed, and ultimately how we'll assess the use and right use of our assets moving forward. You'll have seen within the document that there are 5 core principles or objectives, if you like, that have been established that will inform the way that we make all decisions and take actions in the relation to property. And throughout the document, I've captured then what I've described as behaviours, if you like, that are linked to those objectives. So if I just pick one in the context of fit-for-purpose assets, clearly you'll appreciate that fit-for-purpose is quite a broad term in terms of what that means and what that relates to. That is very relevant to things such as how we execute and use our planned maintenance and reactive maintenance, as well as how we engage with different community groups and making sure that the assets that people are in is fit to meet the needs of those who provide the services, but clearly those who access them as well. So that is, if you like, a summary of the purpose. What's also contained within the strategy is a summary of the portfolio. We have a very diverse portfolio within our ownership. I've tried to summarise as best I can, and I appreciate there's probably significantly more operational detail that could be contained. Important, I reiterate, this is a strategic document, so it is high level, but hopefully is helpful to the committee in a summary of those assets we own, where, and I suppose why we own them. The kind of next 2 sections, if you like, that I know certainly will be of interest to this particular committee is around policies and procedures relevant to this strategy. There are 3 supporting policies that directly influence the way that we manage our assets, those namely being the community asset transfer policy, the disposals policy, and the rental concession policy. And in different ways, all of those obviously influence the way that different community groups, for example, engage with us, different occupiers, and clearly the kind of day-to-day management of decisions that we have to take as landlord services, the area and department within the authority who's directly responsible for the management of assets. The appendices includes all 3 policies. They have been updated, and you'll find you will have read and find those notes within. Second to that is obviously the procedures themselves, so I suppose the execution of this document. I've captured not only an update on landlord services as I described, so kind of what is our estates and property services teams, the departments who manage and look after the assets and maintain them, but equally the associated working groups that will now be established to make sure that we have real clarity on property-related decisions being taken by the right professionals in the right environments, something that is clearly minuted and auditable and can be tracked. So when we bring decisions and information through as is constitutionally already the requirement through Cabinet or full Council, that they have the benefit of those working groups sat behind them and the information relevant to them. The other reason I suppose that's really critical, members will understand, is me looking to introduce a very clear and renewed discipline in the way the property matters are dealt with. It's important we acknowledge that we're in an environment where we're having to do more with less every single day, and as a result, when we talk about service transformation, often land and property is critical to facilitating that. Clearly, as a department, we want to continue to help support the Council to achieve it. The final point in terms of the structure of the report is that relating to the asset management plan, which is Appendix 1 in the report. That effectively, if you like, is the action plan, is translating the strategic document into the actual actions that will be delivered from it. The sequencing, if I may, Chair, just to outline, I suppose, what will happen is a wrap-up. is that clearly we welcome all comments today in relation to the strategic document and the plan. It's proposed that the asset management plan will be reported annually to the Performance and Overview Committee. That committee will equally be receiving this report and strategy on Monday for scrutiny ahead of presentation to full council next Thursday. So I hope, Chair, that's helpful as a whirlwind summary of, I suppose, the document itself, welcome feedback, and obviously particularly in relation to the policies and procedures I've just quickly referenced. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, questions, please. Rodri.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Chair. I had a question about the process of putting together the revised strategy. In the document, you talk about the consultees and the engagement sessions you ran internally. I was just wondering, in terms of if there's 1,500 assets, the vast majority of them look like they're public facilities in some form. So I was just wondering what consideration was given to the business users of those facilities and the Joe public service users that would be using them.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, an important one, I think, in terms of consultees and formulation of this strategy, because I will have highlighted equally in the same section that Audit Wales, when they scrutinised the previous strategy, and you appreciate every 5 years this is renewed, there's questions there about kind of the input and different stakeholders who contributed. Critically, as I've outlined, clearly cabinet members and chief officers have contributed to the formulation of this. Equally, service managers and I suppose service providers is the key point for me in terms of the people that they engage with, the public, our residents, how they would be influenced by any decisions taken here. I appreciate, obviously, there's core principles. So if I use fit for purpose as an example, I don't doubt that every resident and community group we engage with would say that they'd like to be in a facility that is fit to meet their needs. That's certainly something I think we've captured. What we also have, and perhaps I've not directly articulated, is obviously our experience within landlord services in terms of engaging with a huge number of these individuals. So if I cite community groups as another example, whilst they are community groups, in many of our buildings they're tenants of ours. So in the context of a rental concessionary policy, we obviously have very live examples and ongoing work with them as to how that policy could be best used, best accessed, and I suppose being very clear in terms of parity and consistency over how those matters are dealt with. So but the feedback I've had in engaging with groups over that has been really positive in terms of I think people are keen to have consistency. Very difficult to do when you're dealing with historic agreements and possibly assets that have been in ownership and with a particular occupier for perhaps 50, 60 years. But I'm hoping that's what this strategy can help to introduce. So as I said, I've set out in the strategy whose input. The only further offer I can make actually in terms of implementation is what we'd absolutely be looking to launch is a communication strategy on the back of this document, should it be adopted, to communicate to those 48 or 49 community groups you already deal with as to how, if any, effect this will have on them. But let's not forget, this is a live document. These things are already in place in some way, and we're simply looking to improve them and enhance them in some way. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Phil.
Nick, I know that various working groups are being established, and they've come and gone over the years. All of the names were quite familiar to me from yeah, okay. How active are they going to be, and have we already identified surplus assets? I don't need to know what they are. That wouldn't be appropriate in a public meeting, but have we already got an idea as to what assets they'll be reviewing, or is it a blank page for them?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Murphy. I think in terms of surplus assets, if you like, there'll be some that are known already that have been through this council through a decision to be declared surplus. As you say, perhaps don't need to be drawn into specifics, but in terms of the purpose of some of these accommodation groups, it absolutely will be to continue to monitor that and assess whether there are any that perhaps are surplus to requirements now, or I suppose just as critically, are there any that are being underutilised that we can utilise better through perhaps co-location of different services coming together. I'm mindful if I do share an example. Members will recall that I think last month a decision was taken in relation to Mountain House School, which is obviously an asset that's been vacant for some time, and I think an opportunity has been identified to use it again for an educational use. That's certainly what I would hope these accommodation groups will help to do, is to just make sure that there's no gaps, and part of our role, I suppose, is having that independence in terms of not being in a specific service area. We operate within resources, and we help a large number and any and all services meet the requirements of the work they're trying to do. So as you say, there's not a list as such necessarily. Clearly, we're always considering rationalisation, but the critical point for me is, are we making best use of our assets? And if we are, can we do more? And can we keep doing that?
It was actually Mountain House that was in my mind to maybe ask the question, so thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you. Tony.
Hello, yeah, thank you. Castlegate. Well, I just left there now, half an hour ago, where Caldicot Town Council have purchased themselves, declare an interest in that, personal, non-prejudicial. The development you created seems to be a popular one. Do you intend to use that policy across the whole of the Castlegate? And also, what are your views on some retail units being able to operate from there? Is that a future thought?
Yeah, no, thanks, Councillor Leeson, and thanks for, I think, drawing attention to it as well. Actually, it's helpful promotion in terms of the kind of space that we have available, so I appreciate it. Yeah, for members who aren't aware, perhaps if I speak to that briefly, Castlegate Business Park, which is one of our investment assets, we obviously have a number of kind of vacant spaces there, albeit a kind of gradually reducing vacant space, thankfully. In order to try and address the fact that clearly the office market has changed now over a period since the pandemic, we launched what we're describing as Mon Space, which is effectively making available smaller meeting rooms on far more flexible terms. So what we can try and accommodate is perhaps a particular resident who's operating out of a spare room at the moment or their garage and looking to expand their business, that they have an environment that they can move into that is stepped and gives them an opportunity to grow. I suppose the ambition, Councillor Easton, would be if they're very successful, they may well want to take on bigger and additional space within the premises. You're quite right to highlight this being successful. At the moment, we've been active with Mon Space for around about a month, just before Christmas. There are 9 units, 4 of which are already occupied, and we have live interest in some of the others. I certainly hope that we'd be able to replicate that in other areas. We obviously have to reflect on what's the most appropriate location for co-working, if you like, as well, or indeed in kind of desk sharing. But no, I'm absolutely confident that is something we could, and we are actively looking to do elsewhere, and seems to be working very well in Castlegate Business Park.
And could I ask a question, not totally related, but you also own the rest of the retail park, don't you? You've got the R&R, you've got the scrapyard, and you've got Musto's and pieces like that. You own those properties, don't you?
Yeah, so the estate you're referencing, Councillor, is Castleway Industrial Park. Just confuse it, similar names. Yeah. So you're quite right, yeah. We have Castleway Industrial Estate, which is within the Severn Bridge Industrial Estate. Yeah. We also have Old Pill Farm and Pill Farm, which is slightly further removed, but within the same estate. So off the top of my head, I think that's in the region of kind of 25 units, probably combined across all of them. Very well occupied, but yes, sorry, I didn't cut across your question, but you're right, yeah, we do own that estate.
Could Peter and myself speak to you privately after the meeting about issues? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. Very detailed, and but yet some of the specific stuff, I guess, this comes down to my finance background. I expect some real hard numbers in it, but I understand the audiences aren't necessarily just this committee. The page 23 of the report, 113 of the bundle. The portfolio, it says at the top, £375 million valuation and around 1,500 land and property assets. Now, I don't think I need a list of all 1,500 assets, but I think the substantial ones that make up the majority of the 375 million would be helpful to know, and because clearly there's a huge range of size and valuation here. And I thought, oh, well, perhaps the table, one on that table would do that, but that table doesn't seem to be a complete list. Because last time I checked my math, that's over 800 or so. So there's still an awful lot of things that aren't on that list. Can you just quickly fill me in my ignorance, really, about understanding what the rest of the 1,500 would be if they're not on that table?
You know, thank you for the question. And no, yeah, certainly right to pick up the maths. I'm glad you didn't ask me to name all 1,500. I think in terms of the maths, just draw attention to that. So there is a table of which I've summarised as the number of assets. The reason it doesn't add up to 1,500 is assets in our asset register is possibly broken down more than what we would describe as a single asset. And so if I cite an example, if there is an area of open space, say a Bailey Park in Abergavenny as an example, in the asset register that might be made up of 3 or 4 different areas. It depends on the period of time it's come into council's ownership and how. In the case of public open space, you'll understand that'll be linked to the developer, perhaps transferring that over to the local authority. That, if you like, when added together, adds up to the 1,500. In the nature of the way that we manage assets, obviously, it's very much one and the same. So no, so you're right to highlight the discrepancy. Perhaps I didn't include enough of a description on that for the reasons I've just said. But that is the difference. Can certainly reflect on, I suppose, how we would capture value. So we obviously have net book valuations for all of these assets, and you'll be surprised to hear that things such as educational premises will make up the vast majority of that. That's not captured there, but as I say, I hope that's helpful in terms of the distinction between the whatever that number adds up to, probably in the region of kind of 500 assets rather than the 1,500 that's referenced just above.
Yeah, thank you. Helpful, thank you.
Can I go Colin first, please?
Yeah, hi Nick. I was just going to ask about Newport Leisure Park and Cineworld, because I noticed you put some sort of comforting things in there, but obviously the industry is in a bit of a precarious position, and I'd certainly like to watch Napoleon before it closes. But I noticed that the Cineworld in Hengrove in Bristol closed in November, so I'm thinking that the dynamic is probably an important part of the dynamic, the cinema, and that if we lost it, do we have any plan to with that space going forward? Because obviously it's a substantial space.
Thanks for the question, and I appreciate it. I'm not sure there may well be some overlap, I think, with probably a later agenda item, actually, in relation to the investment committee and, I suppose, the performance of the assets. You'll appreciate, obviously, in a public forum, perhaps I won't be able to go into any commercial details relating to Cineworld, but what I can give absolute assurance of is, since we became aware of the fact that they declared bankruptcy in the US and administration in the UK, they've continued to meet all of their obligations. We have really strong confidence they will continue to operate. As would be prudent, we obviously reflect on what would be an alternative use should that come to happen, which we hope it doesn't, and we have explored means of kind of different ways of either separating that space or meeting some other users. It's very fair to say that clearly the performance of the asset is very strongly linked to Cineworld as an anchor tenant, but it's trying to get, I have included, if you like, intentionally comforted wording. We had some positive updates, I think, at the time that I probably drafted this report, and we have again since, and I shared that some of that in our investment committee update that was just before Christmas. So yeah, I hope that's helpful, is to give the assurance we're always looking at exit strategies as and when needed, and just protecting our position, I suppose, minimising risk, and we continue to do that on NLP as we do with Castlegate Business Park and any other assets.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, at an appropriate time, or now if you like, but it's going to come up. Can you just give us an update on Innovation House? It was really picking up from Tony's question about Castlegate and breaking down and filling void spaces.
Might I suggest I maybe go back to Nick's sort of response to the previous question. So we've got a subsequent report on the review of the investment committee, which is split into two parts of that report. One in terms of proposed governance changes, the second part which talks to a performance update on our investment portfolio, which catches both Innovation House as much as Castlegate and NLP. Might I suggest, Chair, it may be just better and more appropriate to maybe bring those types of questions up in that item, bearing in mind, I guess, what we're considering here is the strategy, and I guess my desire, I guess, just in terms of from a governance and audit committee on its way through now, as Nick has highlighted, performance and overview scrutiny committee on Monday, and council, importantly, next Thursday for approval. The scope of the committee, I don't have to talk, clearly the chair and the committee understand that. What I'm keen to just get feedback on is making sure that, I guess, the policies that underpin the strategy, the essence of the strategy itself, and the governance that we're looking to embed to strengthen arrangements around our land and building portfolio, that those things are seen by the Governance and Audit Committee as to be, appropriate. That's what I'm keen for. So, Councillor Murphy, absolutely fine with the question. I think it's just probably better placed on the next item, if that's okay.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I agree. Okay, if we could bear in mind as we ask further questions. John Cook, please.
That was the same question, Chair. I will leave it to the next session.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nick. I think this is an excellent piece of work, and I fully recognise the amount of work that has gone into it. I think the strength of this strategy is that it is a cross-authority, collaborative thinking process rather than a strategy developed by consultants and presented to council. So, given all the demands on all of your time and the operational projects that I know you have to keep moving on, I think you deserve great recognition for this piece of work. I had a number of questions. With regard to the rental concessions policy, now I realise that there you're looking to regularise and put in place a more robust process for a situation that has existed over and grown up over many years, and that unwinding any of those community partnerships would be quite difficult. Nonetheless, I think the rental policy that we have, the rental grant policy, I don't know how unusual that is amongst local authorities. I perhaps should declare an interest as a volunteer director of the Gateway Credit Union, which is a tenant of the council. But it does create a situation where, for instance, one sports club is effectively having a subsidy from the council, whereas another sports club, which is not a tenant of the council, is not getting a similar subsidy. So I wonder what options were looked at in deciding to come forward with what is effectively a tightening and continuation of the existing rental grant policy. Although I do agree, I appreciate it would be very difficult to touch. I'm really pleased to see, in terms of the disposals policy, the commitment to a full options appraisal before any disposal. I think we can all see disposals that have taken place previously where we now wish we still perhaps had that asset. With regards to the agricultural proposed disposals, can you confirm that that also applies there? I'm thinking about the challenge between the need for capital and the council's aspirations in terms of food and food security. Having sat through planning meetings where we're looking at what was once council productive farmland and is now a series of pony paddocks on the edge of town. How are those tensions to be balanced, and is that through the options appraisal process? And also, where the business units that the council holds seem to be doing extremely well and seem to provide a very much needed opportunity for people starting businesses. So I wondered what the plans were for, if any, to create more of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Some very comprehensive questions there, quite detailed questions. Can I check with Nick? Are you in position to respond to Sarah on those points? Okay, please.
No, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bush, as well, for the kind words at the beginning. I appreciate it. I think, yeah, I'll try to capture everything. I'm happy to either, by all means, come back to me or pick up a conversation separately. Happy to. So, just on the point of rental concessionary policy, you're quite right. I mean, it's an existing policy, obviously, of the authority. So we have around 48, 49 community assets we support. Not all of them access the rental concession policy. Effectively, it's there for where it's appropriate and there's a need to perhaps supplement and support a community group that otherwise can't operate without it. That is something that's consistent with other local authorities. Others use them, utilise them, albeit clearly how it's administered, I suppose, can be slightly different amongst many. I suppose the key bit I'm trying to introduce in terms of the policy change here is that it'd be very easy for local authorities, and many do, in terms of issuing a rental concession at a point in time, and then that perhaps not being reviewed for a period of 20 to 30 years, as clearly the asset itself evolves and changes. And just like an example, if there's a sports club that perhaps is in its infancy and launching and is able to perhaps create a bar on site for some reason that become quite profitable, then clearly that would be relevant to the amount of rental concession that somebody should be eligible for. In the context of value, and it's just, I suppose, contextualise this, the maximum amount, as is the current policy, the maximum amount that any community group can access is 95% rental grant, or rental relief, if you like, avoidance of their rent. Clearly that should be monitored and reduced to reflect perhaps what's happening on site. The key thing I think we're keen to introduce as well is an encouragement of the group themselves to reduce their reliance on that community grant going forward. We all understand operating sustainability is a challenge of this local authority, as it is for everyone. What we're keen to do is work with community groups to establish either a business plan or that future plan of how they can continue to deliver those really good outputs, but whether perhaps a less of a reliance on the small contribution that we're making, not only in terms of the physical asset, but clearly in terms of subsidising. And I think, as I've mentioned in the agreement, is around about £140,000 worth of rent a year at the moment that the council, if you like, is foregoing to help facilitate these community outputs. That's very good. We want to continue to do that. And if we can do that in a way that's more sustainable and gives them a long-term future beyond just the existence of that grant, then all the better. So that's the rental concession point. If I take the disposals, if you like, all together, you're quite right to highlight. We've reiterated, if you like, the need for an options appraisal to inform disposals that take place. Clearly, everyone will be familiar with the fact that any cabinet report or council report that comes through has the necessity for an options appraisal anyway. But we're looking to strengthen that because, I suppose, to the point earlier I made to Councillor Murphy around Mountain House School, there are many different ways to achieve outcomes and policy objectives for the authority. Disposal for capital receipt doesn't necessarily mean it's at the expense of others. And if I cite a farm as an example, we may well have a farm within the portfolio that is part of a lifetime or retirement tenancy at the moment. We have very little ability to impact what happens within that farm. If the farm tenant was to say, well, I'd like to purchase a percentage of that farm and then release the land early to the authority, then that would not only enable us to achieve a capital receipt and facilitate the farmer purchasing some land, but we may well unlock a land parcel that then can be used for more sustainable farm practices or the like. So if you like, I suppose the position is it's not purely just capital receipt. You know, it is financial output is what can be achieved, but social can social and some of the other kind of policy objectives we're trying to achieve. So that's the summary, I suppose, of the disposal one. The final one, Councillor Birch, I think I captured was around the kind of business units. You're very right to highlight, you know, we have a very high retention and occupancy rate within our industrial units. Whilst there has been some small turnover recently in one particular area of the estate, and particularly through the pandemic, actually, we've done very well, I think, to retain, you know, the businesses that have been there, and those that leave us are because they're growing and developing to such a case that they'd like to take more space within Monmouthshire. We have promoted, put forward a proposal as part of a candidate site for new startup businesses as part of the replacement LDP. I'm clearly not trying to preempt that as a conversation, that's one to follow, but I'm just highlighting it. It's certainly on our radar, there's an opportunity there, and hopefully land within our ownership that we can use to try and meet that demand. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Nick. That's great.
Okay, I'm not seeing any of it. Oh, beg your pardon, Rodri.
Yeah, I only had a couple of quick questions around the asset management plan as well. There's quite a few lapsed or imminent deadlines listed. Is it fair to assume that the ones that are already lapsed have been achieved? That the ones in the next 3 months in particular are going to be met? And obviously give you an opportunity, is there any challenges, issues, risks you want to highlight? And then the second question was around, for me, strategy should always be ambitious in their aims, but achievable in delivery. I did wonder with some of the current performances, with some of the targets, are some of them aspirational enough? And just to get your take on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the follow-ups. No, it's really helpful. I think just in case, in terms of the asset management plan, and I appreciate probably an exercise I need to do in terms of going back through the 46 or whatever the actions I've listed. Important, I acknowledge. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list in terms of there are many more things that perhaps aren't captured here that we're actively working on. And equally with this list, there may well be things that, as they're reviewed annually or quarterly as we do them, that perhaps will fall off the list, because you'll appreciate there's certain things here that will be subject to a council decision or decisions to be taken. In terms of, I am absolutely confident that there's many here listed as ongoing that have progressed. I think I've cited some in terms of, for example, I noted yesterday that there is a decision relating to repurposing of some of our agricultural cottages that I think is listed as a December cabinet and will actually go to cabinet next week. So there will be some change, but there's nothing highlighted that I think is a key risk in terms of delivery, so we certainly can do that. And the broader risks I've captured, if you like, within the kind of later in the document. In terms of the point, I suppose, of deliverability versus ambition, I think it's a really fair one. You'll appreciate from my perspective, I was absolutely keen to ensure that everything within this strategy is deliverable and achievable, but appropriately as well. And when we talk to things such as, I think, the performance framework I've captured around EPC rating and what might be achievable, perhaps it would be quite easy for me to list that I want every single council asset to achieve an EPC rating of A. Well intended and ambitious, but I think we have to be realistic as well about what's required in terms of investment, etc., to be able to achieve that. So I think they're proportional and appropriate, but like everything, we'll absolutely try and push that further in as much as we can. And I suppose that's part of the ability for Performance and Overview Committee annually to review that and say, are these perhaps too conservative and can be pushed further? So so yeah, that's my, hopefully, yeah, it's proportional and adequate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments by members. So let's draw this item to a close by really echoing some of the points Sarah's made. Clearly, there's a significant amount of work has gone into this document. So thank you to Nick and the team for what is a comprehensive and very informative document. I think it's credit to you that it's been presented so well, and you've talked to it very eloquently. In terms of the ask of this committee, you're asking this committee to review the strategy itself and the associated policies, and to recommend approval to full council. So noting that we've had a good discussion, members made some comments, relatively insignificant in the scheme of things, but I think it's the view of this committee that we are broadly comfortable and supportive of both the strategy, the policies as set out, and indeed the overall shape of the action plan. So thank you, Nick. We'll now move on to item 8. Item 8 is the forward work plan. May I just check with Wendy, or indeed other officers, when will the future meeting dates be agreed, please?
We're in the process of looking at the calendar dates for 24, 25 now, and I did just circulate them to officers, so there may be some recommendations on those coming forward.
Okay, thank you. So looking at what's proposed for next month, for me it looks broadly okay. And I'm just going through the items at the moment. Yeah, so for me that looks okay, but yet again, very happy to take comments from members in terms of what's on the agenda for both the next meeting and the meeting in April. Any comments, please? No, I think we're okay. We'll move on to item 9. Item 9 is to receive and or approve the minutes of the last meeting. I think, beg your pardon, Peter. Oh, thank you. Martin, I didn't see your hand.
Sorry, Chair, you were faster than my finger. Just to say that we haven't had the opportunity to actually mention it in the committee meeting today, but obviously the big chunk for our next meeting, I presume, will be receipt of the accounts. I don't know whether it's appropriate for us to get an update at this point, because we haven't formally discussed them at all today as to where we are in terms of timelines and whether February will indeed be met.
So you mean the audit of the accounts, but Audit Wales, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm not.
Indeed, yeah.
Thank you. I think it's a reasonable point. I'm just wondering whether Rachel is still on the line. Rachel, if you're still on the line, are you able to respond formally to Martin's point, please? It's about where we are in terms of the achieving the next meeting for delivery of the annual audit.
Yep, no problem. I'm quite confident that we will achieve delivery for the next meeting. We're hoping that our detailed work will be finished by the end of next week. And then it'll be a case of just putting reports together and looking through a revised set of accounts. So and getting a draft ISA 260 over. So yeah, I'm feeling quietly confident. Something could come out of the woodwork. We'll caveat that in the late stages, but so looking on track for the time being, Martin.
Okay, that's really positive and as expected. So thank you. Thank you again. Okay, we'll move on to I said item 9. Item 9 is the minutes of a previous meeting. I'm content with these now much more summarised, concise minutes, so I'm happy to accept them on your behalf, but please shout if you have any disagreement with the accuracy of what's stated.
Happy to move, Chair.
Great, thank you. And then let's move swiftly on to item 10. Item 10 is the annual performance review of the Investment Committee. For me, this is a very interesting paper, and we're being asked to consider several matters as set out in paragraph 2. just going to check with Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive. Are you introducing this item? Or, yeah, okay, fantastic. In that case, Peter, please assume you've read the paper, very informative, well written, but please just take us through it, maybe confirming what you're asking this committee to do, and highlight points of note.
Chair, are we supposed to have this in committee or is it open?
It's open.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just picking up on Councillor Eason's point, yeah, open in the sense of looking to present the report and respond to questions, but to the extent, I guess, that if any questions arise where, I guess, responses from officers, either myself and Nick, take us to a point whereby clearly we're restricted due to, you know, for reasons of commercial confidence and the like. I guess, depending on the nature of those, it's really for the Chair to determine as to whether you're happy to receive a written response subsequent, or depending on if there's a bundle of such questions, the ability to be able to move into private session, I guess. But obviously that's a decision for the Chair and the committee. And I'm just almost reminding myself back on that one, because I think we may have a similar issue when we go into performance and overview scrutiny on Monday. So that's probably sort of the starting point, really, and just as a bit of an aide-memoire and a reminder to the committee, because it's similar just in terms of intermittent update that we've provided both to this committee, equally to Alistair Neil as chair, and to Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee. It's been, I guess, a little while coming, just in terms of the need to sort of take stock and review the governance arrangements in and around our commercial and commercial investment portfolio. The delay, I guess, is not necessarily overly a concern, because the investment committee has been meeting periodically in any event in order to preside over, under the existing governance arrangements, the performance of the investment portfolio, which is one part of its primary remit. Although principally the remit currently of the investment committee, as was originally intended when it was put in situ back in 2018, was to preside over investments that the council might be looking to entertain. You've received update actually in the last annual performance update to the committee. You were provided update just to sort of highlight that, well, firstly, the last significant substantive investment that was made was just literally on the cusp of going into lockdown in March 2020. And clearly, and I don't need to tell all of you, that subsequent to that, the world has been a slightly uncertain and volatile place, and no more so, I guess, in investment markets. So, again, not a surprise in terms of us reporting back into you last year about the very fact that, you know, a pretty hard pause was put on entertaining any further investments from that point forward. And that position hasn't changed, and we don't foresee that position changing anytime soon. So it's ultimately prompted this report now coming forward with proposed proposed changes to the governance arrangements, which I'll just quickly talk to, but on the basis, as the Chair's highlighted, that you've read the report. And that'll cover off the first substantive part of the report. The second part is summarised, sanitised performance update, and use the word sanitised to Councillor Eason's question. I guess if we were in the throes of an investment committee, we could be a little bit more open in closed session in terms of talking of matters of commerciality and the like. But I think it's right and appropriate at this juncture, as we have done in previous updates into the Governance and Audit Committee, which is required by the asset investment policy, to talk to the performance update. And Nick will deal with that second aspect of the report once I've covered off the first part. It's worthwhile highlighting the trajectory and sequence here in terms of getting a decision made. So investment committee convened, looking at Councillor Murphy, Tuesday afternoon. It's been a very busy week with budget setting. Tuesday, the investment committee convened initially to preside over the report, and the report, thankfully, was endorsed. The proposed and revised arrangements were roundly supported, with comments made. just to sort of pick up that sort of verbal update element of from the meeting, which is, I guess, recommendation 2.1 in the report. And unless Councillor Murphy, I think he was the only other person in the room who was present as an observer, but you can confirm or otherwise as to whether my update is an accurate. Sorry, Councillor Easton, you were virtual. Sorry, apologies. So there was, I guess, support from all sides just in terms of the proposed changes. I think the substantive matter, which is probably one for Monday for performance and overview scrutiny, was just in terms of the workload of that committee and in terms of them, obviously, their levels of oversight going forward now in terms of performance monitoring. But I guess, and looking forward at Nick in front of me and the item that you've just considered on the asset management strategy, they also have interest in, as Nick's touched on, in looking on an annual basis at making sure that, I guess, progress is being made with delivery of the asset management plan sitting under the strategy. So both of those items will be up for discussion now on Monday. So I guess that substantive matter, we're not concerned, but an observation, I think, from the investment committee, we can air that one on Monday. Councillor Murphy and Easton, I don't know whether you want to make any comment. I don't want to misrepresent anything in terms of my summation, but
no, it was. I think members of the committee were quite content. It's really lost its purpose now. It was only set up for 3 years anyway. In the last administration, we decided that we wouldn't have any more investments because the markets were far too volatile. The current administration is continuing that theme. So nothing's being got rid of. The only purpose that the committee could have now is monitoring the investment returns, and that can easily be done, and probably more appropriately be done at performance and overview and this committee. So putting the investment committee in abeyance, just park it up, call it in whenever it's required, but it's a committee that really hasn't got any purpose anymore.
Helpfully stolen a degree of my thunder. But I think if I just maybe just talk to two things. So I'll just add ever so briefly, just in terms of the reasons why we're here to propose these governance changes. So we've talked about, and Councillor Murphy's just sort of highlighted again, I think, the point in terms of that point around market volatility. I think you'll recognise that if we take ourselves from a point of 2018 to where we sit here in 2024, arguably the challenges facing the council financially and the strain on its balance sheet are more, undoubtedly, than they were then. And that is a consideration as well in terms of a degree of commercial risk that you can look to take given circumstances. So that is another factor. You'll also be familiar from the update I provided 12 months ago that UK Treasury, the Chancellor, the Debt Management Office that provides local authorities with the majority of its borrowing through the PWLB, there are constraints now in place through that and the Prudential Code that restricts us from just looking to borrow, purely for the purpose of securing a yield on a commercial investment. So if you understand that, where it ultimately takes you to, and where we ultimately are straitjacketed, restricted, I guess, it will mean that any future investment activity is probably in response to either a market failure, where a local authority has rightly a role to step in, might be in a high street or for example, or secondly, and possibly more likely, is where it's in the furtherance of the council's policy aims and objectives. So if I talk to a community and corporate plan and what's embedded therein, responding, for example, to issues of affordable housing or a shortage in temporary homelessness accommodation, there will be, likely intent to act on those things that will require a level of investment. Doesn't fall into your pure commercial investment, but there may be clearly a commercial aspect to that. And I think what's being proposed as a consequence of all of this now in terms of the proposed changes is that if you just step yourself back, and Councillor Murphy was helpful in highlighting the 3-year time limit. When the investment committee was originally put in place back in 2018, it was afforded delegated authority. The investment committee is a subcommittee of the council, okay? It's a subcommittee of the council. It delegated £50 million of borrowing to that investment committee, and it gave it, it afforded it under an asset investment policy, a terms of reference, etc. That 3 years has lapsed. So if it was wanting to make a decision under its current governance, it couldn't. It would have to go back to council in order to make that decision. But if you just reflect on the constraints that I've just talked about, actually, and you just reflect on the constitution of the council, we have decision-making powers within the constitution through cabinet and through council, scrutiny committees, etc. And decisions can be undertaken within that decision-making framework as set by the constitution. So there's a question. So if I take an example that I've just used, if you take, for example, a response to affordable housing, that doesn't need to go through an investment committee. It doesn't require levels of due diligence where you look to draw in experts to be able to stress test, for example, an investment proposition, because we have that skill in-house and it's right because it's policy driven. It should be in the public gaze. The public should be able to see that decision making play out through cabinet or council. It's only really to the extent where there is a level of commerciality to it that needs to be done in somewhat in confidence. I would expect, and this is what is now proposed to Councillor Murphy's point, the investment committee goes into abeyance in the rare occasion when we may need to actually activate it again. Council, because it needs to go to council, the decision first off, council can then determine that an investment committee has stood back up to preside over it and make a recommendation back to it. Okay, so that's ultimately what's being recommended. And then the other bit, which again, I think Councillor Murphy's highlighted, is to do with the existing investment portfolio, what we currently hold. And we're splitting that responsibility 2 ways. Number one, the performance monitoring, as Councillor Murphy highlighted, it's right and proper that goes to performance and overview scrutiny, because that's where it would sit in a scrutiny environment. The Governance and Audit Committee's role, rightly, is in looking to make sure on an ongoing basis, and that timeline, the level of how periodic that is not prescribed, but it's to determine and seek comfort that the governance arrangements are working effectively. And that, Chair, you may, for example, lean on a YAN, all right, as part of the cyclical audit plan to achieve that. There are various ways to skin the cat, and I guess equally in the same way of something I didn't raise in the last item, but with the asset management strategy. So if you reflect on my point of earlier, the asset management strategy and what I was looking for from the committee was, and what you did, is you looked at the policies and the governance arrangements, and were they fit for purpose in terms of what were being proposed. So if the answer to that is yes, you are comforted, you want to be therefore then comforted going forward that they are operating effectively. So there's a point of reflection for the committee, yeah, as much for the investment portfolio, but actually the wider land and property portfolio as well. So therein lies what is being proposed by way of the revised governance arrangements. Hopefully that's been explained and understood, and you can actually understand the logic and the sense, given where we're now at, to points that echoed by Councillor Murphy, but ultimately as to why we're making the recommendations to the governance changes that we are.
Okay, thank you. It's very comprehensive and, from my perspective, very sensible. So let's go to questions on the governance changes before Nick updates us on the performance matters. So any questions or comments on what's been set out by Peter, please? No, silence. Okay. We looked at.
I was just going to really echo what I said earlier. It's the logical thing to do, and most of the decisions previously made were either made to increase revenue to support the budget, or to promote jobs or services or whatever. There was always a reason for it. But in the current climate, we don't need to do it that way. So let's park it up and as Peter said, bring it forward whenever the occasion arises.
Okay, good. That's my take as well. But let's hear from Nick now in terms of the performance update, please.
Thank you, Chair. And if you like, I'll keep my update very brief, because I'm mindful there are questions actually to be raised that I'm sure will overlap with what my comments would be. As Pete's captured already, I think obviously we provided an update, I think it was December last year, in relation to the performance of the portfolio, the investment portfolio itself. You'll see within the report, I think under 5.1, that I've just listed a kind of comparison there of a kind of table of Castlegate Business Park and Newport Leisure Park, and how their performance has thankfully improved over the last 12 months. Avoiding anything that may be commercially sensitive, you'll appreciate I've noted that we've had quite a significant letting at Castlegate Business Park, an existing tenant, Wonder Group, who are an underfloor heating manufacturer, who've expanded significantly over the last 12 months. They were doing so just before, at the time of the last update, but have done so again, which is great. And then equally, just in terms of Newport Leisure Park, I've acknowledged the fact that I think at the last performance update, there were perhaps one vacant unit and 2 tenants that we're having some difficulty with in terms of arrears. One of those tenants has since been replaced and successfully. Now we have Innerflate, which is a trampoline park that's operating very successfully from the park. And equally, we have Starbucks now that are operating from what was the former Frankie and Benny's unit on site. There is still another vacant unit. I don't want to say on that offer. We're considering an offer for that unit at the moment, and I hope to be able to bring a positive update forward to the Cabinet member and members shortly on that. In terms of contextualising that in terms of the finances, what I have noted is over the financial year, or throughout the calendar year rather, that's a £363,000 improvement in terms of the space across both assets that we've let. So certainly heading in the right direction. Important I acknowledge in terms of the distinction for investment committee. Under the asset investment policy, investment committee were asked to comment on whether either asset should be retained if it was failing to meet the 2% return on investment. So return on investment being effectively the gross income minus expenditure and the borrowing repayments. And you'll see here that at the moment, neither asset was meeting 2%. That's for obvious reasons, if you like, in terms of some of the voids we've had and challenges replacing vacant space. What I'm pleased to report, as you'll see within, I think, the final row of the table I just noted, is that it's not the final row, it's the fourth row actually, is in relation to the forecast for 24-25 is that Newport Leisure Park will return to the 2% return on investment. Castlegate Business Park has some ways to go in terms of that, and you appreciate it's a very different beast, if you like, in terms of not only the scale of investment and cost of the acquisition of Monmouthshire, but as Councillor Easton rightfully highlighted earlier, the kind of more phased approach we need to take. It's highly unlikely a single occupier will come along and take all of the vacant space, however much we might wish for that to happen. So what we're having to do is be quite creative in terms of trying to close that gap, and I'm pleased to say we're making really good progress in doing that. The final point, and it's not for me to undermine it, is that as you'll have seen within the report, whilst Castlegate Business Park and Newport Leisure Park are the acquisitions, we clearly have a far larger commercial portfolio, as we've discussed already in the previous agenda item. I've noted there in relation to Innovation House, and I've drawn that one out specifically because it is ultimately a large office space and one that will be known to members. That space was previously occupied with the Welcome Centre as part of the Ukrainian relief work. It was occupied until June last year. Given that has now ceased, the Welcome Centre is no longer there, that we do still have a business that occupies one of the smaller wings on the second floor in the building and some storage that's being utilised as part of some other areas of work, but we certainly have some vacant space there that we're keen to fill. The space is being advertised, and clearly we'd love for an occupier to come along, but I suppose to the comments I've just made, we're acknowledging that we have meeting rooms and things there that we may need to look at differently and accept that smaller lettings may well be required, and there is some live interest in some of those things as well. So that's the status of, if you like, Innovation House. More than happy, Chair, to take any questions on the broad portfolio as best I can.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, there's the offer. So questions or comments to either Pete or Nick, please.
I think it's important to point out that, particularly with Castlegate, it isn't performing the way it is, but there's rent-free periods in there. There's all sorts of reasons for it, which is why it's suddenly going to get better, and it's quite a success story really, from the major hit that it had. Actually, it's not just Castlegate, it's NLP as well. You know, and the pandemic just about decimated that. Fortunately, the support from Welsh Government was such that we could replace a lot of the rent that would have been missed, but it still didn't alter the fact that there has to be an awful lot of recovery there. So the fact that it has recovered and that Castlegate is substantially let now is a credit to the team, because they worked their socks off. Fair play.
Yep, thank you. Yep, fair comment. So well done again, Nick. Tony.
Yeah, thank you. You didn't mention the positive outcome for Broadway, which has provided, as I say, a positive outcome and good potential for connectivity across the rural Monmouthshire. That was a good one, that.
It's only brief input. Yeah, I think it's just probably worthwhile, because probably I'm better placed than Nick really to refer to Broadway, because I've been directly involved in it. So just to be clear, it was one of the three investments that were made, I guess, under the delegations through the investment committee. It was that March 2020 investment, the latter one. As the report touches on, the detail is in the report, but ultimately the company was put into administration. We'd originally invested in Broadway with the intent of them being a provider of a different type of connectivity, I guess, to try and to reach those hard-to-reach areas of Monmouthshire who otherwise would not benefit, I guess, from full fibre rollout. Company went into administration. We were well placed, I think, just in terms of the way and the way that our commercial lawyers internally and the support that we'd had in terms of the original drafting of all the legal documentation. So we're in a reasonably strong position, as much as you can be going into an administration process. But actually, as the report concludes, we had a very positive outcome there, in the sense that we did not achieve any sense of loss. We had a full repayment on the loan that was outstanding at the point they went into administration. Back to Tony, Councillor Easton's point, you're right to just make that point, in the sense of, and I guess that sort of policy aspect, which is more so around the council's role in working with and championing, I guess, further investments across Monmouthshire, that the likes of an Openreach, a BT, an Oggy, etc., look to make in order to deliver the level of connectivity that you would want and expect in any county within the UK, let alone Monmouthshire. So clearly it was a disappointment that Broadway went into administration, but there is at least some initial levels of confidence, I guess, with the company that has now looked to buy it up. And I guess we wait to see Councillor Easton as to what investment that they put in alongside others to see benefits across the county.
Yeah, can I just ask a question about Innovation House, please? Obviously, I drive past it every day. I see scaffolding being put up one day and scaffolding being taken down the next day, and then scaffolding being put up next week, and so on and so on. I can only assume that is a situation that we're going to change the actual size of the rooms, are we? Or is there a problem with the unit we have?
No, yeah, thanks, Councillor Craig. No, good question. I wish it wasn't every other day. But in terms of the works, you're right. So unfortunately, there are some roof leaks and the problems in the property. It's been a historic issue for Innovation House, actually, I think, for a number of years, certainly when we occupied it as operational premises rather than investment. That's what the scaffolding you've started to be linked to more recently. In terms of broader building works, it's worth me noting, and I've noticed actually it's not on the photograph I've included in the strategy, is we have had solar carports installed at Innovation House as well. So probably something we don't do a good enough job of actually promoting and acknowledging that we've done. But as part of the kind of refit work and colleagues in the decarbonisation team, what they're looking to do, they've installed not only EV chargers, but actually carports themselves at that premises, which I'm hopeful in terms of the future of office buildings and I suppose making it a more attractive space, that'll certainly be appealing to potential occupiers. So in answer to your question, no, I think it's associated with a roof leak is the more recent activity you've seen, but I certainly accept in terms of building works, there's been some for some time, but also because of a really good thing thing as well, I hope, in terms of the carports.
And the other question, may I ask, if we're going to change the operational side of the unit, is that a considerable cost going forward to change access, availability and so on?
So I think that there's elements in the building that perhaps lend themselves to that more than others. If you appreciate, if anybody's been in the building, the ground floor, if you like, already has a number of meeting rooms and kind of separate spaces that themselves could quite quickly be made available for hire. Clearly, the more open plan areas obviously have additional cost implications. The kind of mechanical and electrical considerations, I guess, for us is subdividing is something for us to look at. Like anything, we're keen to do this as well with what would be a potential occupier and make sure we're creating a space that someone's keen to occupy. The reason for that is obviously that's relevant to the amount of expenditure we may have to incur as an authority to make this happen. So I'd certainly rather be in a position where we have perhaps a known tenant who says, I'd like to take on the space if I took on roughly half of the room, and we could look at rent-free periods and different incentives to make that happen. If that's not possible, and at the moment there's limited market interest in that, then clearly we'll have to be proactive in doing so. So I suppose what I'm saying is both things, that the ground floor lends itself to go quite quickly, and we're confident it would. The first floor and the larger wing on the second floor would need some form of subdividing, and we'll work with the potential occupiers to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so let's look to conclude this item by confirming that this committee endorses the proposed governance changes. As people have said, they're pragmatic and sensible. And we do note the performance update with respect to the Council's commercial property and investment portfolio, noting the forecast improvements over time. Thank you one and all. Final item, and unless there's any other business, I'll look to close the meeting by saying thank you, members, thank you, officers. I look forward to seeing you over the course of the next few weeks.
Thank you, Chair.